Hello YouTube, welcome back to Nutkin Farm. Well, this is the 5-year episode. It's been 5 years since I bought Nutkin Farm and 5 years of my channel on Nutkin Farm, because I documented it from the beginning as part of my experiment of someone who'd never owned a farm before, buying a macadamia farm and doing so-called lifestyle macadamia farming. And the video I made 1 year in was in this very place, and I discussed my experiences of the first year. And I know that one of my commenters, who is a little bit on the acidic side, said, look, after 1 year you don't know anything. Well, I'll tell you what, I can up you one. After 5 years, I still think I don't know anything. And that's one of the joys of macadamia farming, actually, is the joy of constant discovery. And it's not just amateurs like me who are constantly discovering things. The industry itself has just changed so much in these 5 years. And on my 5th anniversary here, I do want to revisit what was the most popular video I ever had made, which is, can you do lifestyle macadamia farming? And obviously lots of other people had the same question and looked at, you know, could I buy a macadamia farm and still have another life? And the metrics of that have all changed, and so I'll get into those. But firstly, in terms of how the industry's changed over 5 years, it's remarkable. You know, we've been farming macadamias in Australia seriously since the 1960s, and the changes in the last 5 years seem to me very significant compared with the previous, say, 20 years. I guess I wasn't there for those 20 years, but you look at how farmers do things differently now, and it really has changed. Now, a lot of that has been driven by the changing macadamia price. Now, in 2019, when I arrived here, prices were on the up. They reached a peak in 2021, started falling after that, and crashed hard in 2023. They're on the way back up again in 2024, and it's promising, although still not at a level that I'd consider profitable for this particular farm. It could be if I was more serious about it and put more inputs in, but then the inputs would also cost more. So at the time I started, the kind of recommendations you were getting from agronomists in terms of how to manage your farm involved a lot of chemical fertilizer, applied several times throughout the year, and that obviously involved the cost of chemical fertilizer and also the cost of spreading it, usually by tractor that has a fertilizer spreader towing behind it. And there were some recommendations for mulch and organic matter, but not as much at the time. The industry was in a period, in hindsight, the industry was in a period of trying to get as much out of the trees as you possibly could in the short term, and it sort of neglected some of the long-term considerations of tree health, keeping tree height under control, that sort of thing, while everyone was busy making as much money as they could. And I fed chemically for the first year. I followed the advice of the agronomist, and I did get a good crop from that first year, which was gratifying. But things changed a lot, particularly with the Ukraine war, but also other changes in market prices. But the price of chemical fertilizers in particular went way up, and that was about the same time that macadamia prices were falling. So in terms of inputs, we had a little bit of a problem trying to work out what to do. How do you make the price you get for macadamias match what you're spending on producing the crop? That was as much a problem for lifestyle macadamia farmers as it was for anyone else. Obviously, if you hire in contractors to do your work and the cost of contractors is going up and inflation is driving literally everything else up, then you have even more of an issue in a way than farmers who live on the land, who farm it themselves, don't pay any external costs for labour. Obviously they have their own value of labour themselves, and that's definitely worth money, but they don't pay obviously the same amounts for having things done. So farmers, I think, you know, rather than from some environmental initiative, started looking towards organic methods of farming, certainly in terms of manures and mulches and things that were a bit more resistant to price rises. And if you think about it, well, you know, Australia we're blessed with a great cattle industry, we're blessed with great poultry industries as well, and those things work well with tree crops, and in fact with a lot of horticultural crops, that, you know, you're actually using farming of those livestock to assist farming in horticulture, and of course vice versa. Otherwise the manure wouldn't be worth terribly much to cattle farmers who have no end of the stuff. So farmers began changing their methods. All of a sudden we weren't being told fertilise 4 or 6 times a year. It might have been an optimal way, but there's a difference between optimal and efficient, and people started looking at efficiency very sharply once we were no longer getting $6 a kilo for our nut and shell. Harvesting practices changed as well. You know, the old adage I was taught, certainly from looking at the Australian Macadamia channel and other sources, was that you pick up your nuts every couple of weeks, because otherwise if you leave them on the ground they'll go bad on you. That's been disproven partly by the 2022 season, which the nuts were sitting in water for months, and also partly disproven just by looking at the quality results that came in. Now that we've got fancier sorters and other things that sort of weed out the bad nuts and reduce reject percentages down to really like 1 or 2%, much lower than we were all used to. And so what we discovered was you don't need to harvest nearly as often, and I'll be doing another video on harvesting and how we should manage that in the near future, but I'll put that thought on hold as far as this video is concerned, because I'm more looking at the big picture. So people found ways to save costs, and the macadamia farming changed from something that was intensive all the time, or intensive in some periods, particularly the harvest period, to ones where farmers were saying, well, you know, whoa horsey, this is costing an arm and a leg and I'm not getting that much for the nuts. Let's see what we can get out of doing things a little smarter and a little less. It hasn't always worked. Kernel recoveries did go down and crop yields did go down. We've just had another reduction in our estimated crop for the 2024 season, although that's more to do with weather conditions and harvesting, particularly, you know, when the wet came in the autumn, interfered with a lot of harvesting going on, and in the northern rivers especially. So that is going to impact on crop numbers. But yeah, what people put into the crop obviously affected what they got out of it. No one should be surprised by that. And you know, you then have adjusting market expectations and the processors adjusting their own markets based on who's buying the crop. And again, I'll save those as subjects for another video, because there've been some very interesting movements in world markets, and we're now getting some decent information about those movements as well. So farmers aren't as much in the dark as they used to be on issues like, you know, who's buying our macadamias and what are they paying for them. And that helps us in our dealings with the nut processors in Australia, who are certainly facing some pushback from time to time over what they are offering farmers for their crops. So back on the original topic that I looked at 4 years ago, can you still farm macadamias as a lifestyle option? It's a relevant question, because I do get inquiries from people who are looking at doing the same thing that I did and saying, look, can you help me look at this farm, or, you know, can you give me some advice about what farm I should be looking for if this is my situation? And I'm happy to give it. I never look for anything in return. But in terms of advice I could offer generally on the internet in a YouTube video, yes, it is still possible to do lifestyle macadamia farming. And there's a couple of reasons why that is still viable. One is the price of farms has definitely come down. And again, I do specific videos on the macadamia farm property market, but just as a sneak preview, there's certainly been some discounting of farm prices for farms that haven't been moving in the market for a long period of time. And that's something to be aware of. So your cost of entry into the industry can be substantially lower now. So that's one factor. And while the cost factors of getting contractors or other people in have gone up a bit, they're fairly stable at the moment, and there's plenty of people who farm macadamias themselves who are looking for a bit of contract work because it does help supplement their reduced income from nuts. I certainly went through a period where it was difficult to get contractors because most of them had their own farms and they were so busy harvesting their own nuts that they didn't have especially much interest in coming to pick up yours or to do things with your farm. Those days are over, at least for now, and contractors are readily available to do some work for you if that's how you want to go about it. Now, if you want to do everything yourself, nothing's really changed. There's no special new technology or any increase in difficulty in macadamia farming. The chemicals we spray are safer than ever. That the new generation chemicals are certainly not organophosphates or the kind of thing that would cause birth defects or cancer or those sorts of things. Those bad old pesticides are pretty much gone as far as we're concerned now, and good riddance to them. But if you want to be hands-off and have a macadamia farm that is entirely outsourced, so it's something where you lease the farm and have it sort of farmed for you, the lessee takes the crop, perhaps gives you a share of the crop or pays you a fixed fee for rent of the farm for a lease on whatever basis you want to engage them. That's certainly a little more difficult than it used to be, and again, it's a function of the macadamia price. We really have that dilemma where if you don't have a good producing macadamia farm, someone's not going to find it very attractive to lease from you on the basis that if the crop isn't any good, they won't be making any money and they'll just be paying you money on a lease. If it's a crop sharing arrangement, that's a little bit different, but they still have to contribute their own labour, their own chemicals, fertilisers, pesticides, that sort of thing. So yeah, the complete hands-off method might be a little bit more difficult, but on the other hand, there are still people advertising that they will look at leasing farms, and there is still money to be made. My only caution there is that cost cutting on leased farms can be a little bit too harsh in terms of the long-term health of the farm, in that these contractors or the lessees can often do what gets you bang for the buck in the short term without looking after the long-term health of trees. And by that I mean things like pruning, soil health, soil carbon, and the long-term sort of fertilisers that don't show up in this year's profit margin, but definitely over time show up in a big way. So bear that in mind, that lifestyle macadamia farming should ideally include you doing some of the work and then just setting a balance point in terms of, these are the things I will do, such as mowing. I think is still a basic that you need to do, and I certainly need to do some this week. And the other thing is, obviously managing, talking to consultants, making some decisions about which way you go. You can leave it in the hands of agronomists, and many of them are very trustworthy people, but there's some room for customization. You know, what do you want the farm to be doing in 5 years? Do you want to keep it for 5 years? Do you want to keep it for the rest of your life? Are you in your 50s and planning to have these nuts give you income in your retirement? You can set these time parameters and then adjust your orchard over many years accordingly. Because farming's a slow business, and the changes you make, particularly to an established farm like this one, sometimes take a few years to reward you. So yeah, if you're a get rich quick sort of person, I'd say stay away. So I suppose, while I didn't imagine 5 years ago that macadamia farming would have changed so much, and I certainly didn't think that the macadamia price would have dropped by as much as it did in 2023, it's still a very viable option, and a particularly cheap one to get into at the moment, with several farms on the market, and a capacity for people to come in with a little bit of extra money to spare on things like rehab that the last farmer couldn't afford, for example, and then deal with it that way, and get into the market while the farm prices are low and the nut prices are low. Because we think, look, eventually the nut prices are going to bounce back again. Again, that's something I'll do a separate video on in the near future, to look at how we're going with that, and particularly the market initiatives into India and other countries that haven't even heard of the macadamia but love nuts generally. Definitely exciting times in terms of if we can get demand to kick off there. And of course, if it does that and macadamia prices take off again, don't expect macadamia farms to be cheap again. And if you were looking at that lifestyle opportunity, you might find when the price goes up, it could be very hard to execute on. The idea, I guess, with any take-off investment is that the people who make the most money were the ones who were there on the ground floor, rather than the ones who joined in near the top of the market before the next price down cycle. So bear that in mind as well. And of course, there's the finance costs and interest rates and that sort of thing, which, I don't need to talk to you about. If you're in Australia and if you have any kind of mortgage, you know what pain feels like. And, budgeting for that is fine. Obviously, a macadamia farm can be fabulous for negative gearing, but don't necessarily think you need to do it with negative gearing. There's plenty of ways to spend taxable income on a farm. There's plenty of things that need doing, all of which are completely tax deductible, and you don't necessarily want to do that by giving all your money to the bank, which doesn't improve a farm's asset one little bit. So in this lovely morning in July 2024, I am about to get stuck into my grass work, and it's a lovely mild day to do it in after quite a rainy autumn. So I'll be back in touch again soon, people. Thank you for watching this. For those of you who've been with me for the whole 5 years, a special thank you to you. But you're welcome anytime. As I've said many times, I don't try for millions of subscribers. It's just those who find it interesting, and it's something that, again, I'm surprised I have as many subscribers as I do, and thank you for looking at the meager quality of the videos that I make. I'm getting slightly better, but I wouldn't say they're good. Anyway, catch you all soon. Bye.